In Chapter 12, we are going to explore economic crimes. Economic crimes are categorized as blue-collar, and also referred to as street crimes, such as burglary, white-collar crimes, such as bribery or extortion, and green-collar crimes, which are environmental crimes, such as illegally dumping a toxic substance in a body of water. Green crimes are generally lumped into the white-collar category, but for purposes of this discussion, we're going to explore the crimes as separate categories. So the chapter opens with a story about the Great Connecticut Pharma Heist, and I actually put a link to the full story in Moodle, which is quite fascinating. It's a super quick read, but it's under the additional materials. But to sum it up, basically a group of individuals known as the Cuban Mob entered a warehouse in Connecticut and cleaned it out of nearly $60 million worth of pharmaceuticals. In the case, as the case was being investigated, FBI and other law enforcement learned that other locations and warehouses had been hit as well using the same MO, which was accessing the building through the roof, disabling the security, and then loading goods into a tractor trailer. The total burglary spree resulted in over $100 million in losses. They were eventually caught when a water bottle that was left at the Connecticut warehouse provided a DNA sample, DNA evidence that was a match for somebody that was in the FBI database. The culprits were arrested, prosecuted in federal court, and sadly, despite what the book says, they did not receive long enough sentences. Sadly, their sentences were not long enough. They only received 6 years. So they're already out and about. This kind of crime was planned. It was elaborate. It was inventive. But it's unfortunately not unique. Economic crimes result in billions of dollars in losses to millions of people each year. These offenses can result in a loss of, a few dollars. A case could involve only a few dollars, or, like in the case we just described, millions of dollars. Some of the crimes are committed by amateurs and others by professionals. And as I said, there are 3 categories: blue-collar, white-collar, and green-collar crimes. So before we begin exploring those, though, let's discuss the history of economic crimes. Economic crimes, they have been around for thousands of years. Basically theft of goods was a common crime. Actually, the punishment was death if you stole somebody else's property. The common law defines theft as the intentional taking, keeping, or using of another's property without authorization or permission. It involves an intentional taking of another person's property and intending to deprive the owner and to keep the owner, or to keep for their own personal benefit, like to keep or to sell. So taking something by mistake or accident is not theft, unless, of course, you discover that you accidentally took it and then you don't make any effort to return it. Then it kind of becomes a theft. That is generally what the law is now. Involves an intentional taking of somebody else's property and intending to deprive that person of their ownership by keeping it or then selling it, making money off of it. There are 3 groups in history, in the 18th century, there were 3 groups of property criminals. There was the skilled thieves, smugglers, and poachers. The skilled thieves were street thugs, involved generally in gang members, pickpockets. They'd forge documents. They had counterfeiting items. They plotted their crimes. They negotiated sale of goods that were stolen. Then we had our smugglers. And it's basically what we think of a smuggler now. In this instance, they were transporting illegal goods without paying proper tax. And back then, goods consisted of like gold and gems and spices and spirits, their version of alcohol. Poachers, what'd they do? They stole livestock, game that belonged to other landowners for their own benefits or to sell. Over time, development of their white-collar crimes. Those were a blue-collar crime. Development of white-collar and green-collar crimes started to develop in the area of the industrial era. White-collar crime might be thought of as a new phenomena, though, but in reality has been around since the industrial era. As industries started to develop, we saw fraud and embezzlement that was being committed by respectable middle-class offenders. In the 1930s, criminologist Edwin Sutherland first defined crimes committed by the rich and the powerful during the course of his occupation as white-collar crime. Sutherland noted that white-collar criminals are less likely to be investigated, arrested, or prosecuted than other types of offenders. In Sutherland's day, when they were convicted, white-collar offenders were much less likely to receive prison terms than were common criminals. And that's due to the fact of their social standing. Green-collar crime is a subdivision of white-collar crime and is motivated generally by profit. These crimes are committed against land or wildlife. So let's start talking about specific types of crimes. We'll start with the blue-collar crimes. Blue-collar economic crimes constitute the common law crimes of theft, burglary, and arson. There are generally two types of criminals that commit these acts, the occasional criminal and the professional criminal. Our occasional criminals do not view themselves as committed career criminals. Rather, they act on some impulse or spontaneity in the moment, and their act is usually unplanned. They're usually induced to commit the act due to an opportunity that presents itself, like an unlocked car door or an unattended purse. Nobody's watching. This is called situational inducement, which is an unplanned opportunity to commit a crime. It's not very lucrative. Generally, the acts are committed by teens or someone seeking revenge. And when they're caught, they usually have an excuse. I was going to pay for that. I was just borrowing that. I was going to return it. There's always an excuse. Professionals, on the other hand, they make a significant portion of income from crime. They don't deny their conduct, and they know exactly what they are doing. They are usually engaged in nonviolent forms of criminal behavior, which are undertaken with high degree of skill for monetary gain and maximizing financial opportunities while minimizing odds of apprehension. So let's talk about our specific blue-collar crimes. Start with, I forgot to flip my thing. Professional criminals make a significant portion of income from their crime. Larceny. The first one here is larceny, and larceny has subcrimes, or crimes that fall under it as a category, including shoplifting, credit card theft, auto theft, bad check writing, receiving or possessing stolen goods. They all fall in a category of larceny offenses. So what is larceny? It is theft. It's our fancy word for theft. We already defined it under the common law, taking one's property without their consent with the intent to deprive them of that property and retain it for their own benefit. However, what if you turn your property over to another for safekeeping, or to fix, or to borrow, but you don't get it back? Your intent isn't to give that person your property. You're giving them what's called constructive possession. The person who you gave that property to has constructive possession, not ownership. Ownership still stays with the person who handed the property over. So even though there is no actual taking, and take it from you because you gave it to them, if it's not returned, it's considered larceny or theft. So you might want to think about what you got borrowed from your friends. Give it back. Let's talk about the two larcenies. There's petty larceny, there's grand larceny. Petty larceny, I should say. Sometimes people call it petty larceny. This is a simple theft crime. And let's take an example. Let's use New York's version of petty larceny, which is fairly similar elsewhere. In New York, that's taking property that's valued at less than $1,000. So anything that's less than $1,000 that's stolen item is a petty larceny. And it's a misdemeanor offense, so it's a low-level offense. Versus our grand larceny, which is a felony, it involves amounts or property valued at $1,000 or more. New York also goes one step further. I'm sure they do this in other states as well, is they identify certain property, despite value of it being less than $1,000, as a felony or a grand larceny. For instance, you steal a vehicle. Maybe you steal a car and it's a big junker, and maybe it's not valued at $1,000. Let's say it's valued at $750, and you take it. You might think, oh, that's petty larceny. It's less than $1,000. But under New York law, if you take a car, a vehicle, regardless, it is going to be a grand larceny. Other things like this is if you take a credit card, steal a credit card, may not have any value on it, but by its own taking, it's considered a grand larceny. Felonies result in a harsher penalty than our misdemeanors, as we previously discussed. Let's start with a specific. Shoplifting. It's a type of larceny, or the five-finger discount. It involves taking property from a retail store. Not your neighbor. That would be larceny. They call it shoplifting. But if you take something from a store and you get charged, you're going to get charged with petty larceny, not a charge called shoplifting. It is very common. Retailers report billions of dollars in losses annually. Many stores have high-tech security measures in place. Walmart's one of my favorite. I always say they have a security system like a casino. Very high-tech. There are people around. There are mirrors. There are cameras. Most shoplifters are occasional criminals, those amateurs with no real skills. They're kind of referred to as snitches, which is a different meaning than tattling. But it means they don't think of themselves as thieves, but steal for their own use or for their own sensation-seeking need. Other desires to get something for nothing or to get cash fast for an immediate need, if it's food, drugs. However, research does show that about 10% of the shoplifters are professionals who get their income from shoplifting. But again, their plans are planned out, not off the cuff taking items. And these folks are called boosters or heels, in that they steal with intent to resell the items stolen. And they employ a number of creative and planned tactics. Some examples in the book are really good ones. One method is the booster box, which is a device with a false bottom that can be opened and shut by the operator. It's placed over the goods. The bottom opens up and closes, capturing the goods. Very interesting. But, there are folks that can steal, and you can read the examples in the books. Those things happen. They happen here in Plattsburgh. Merchant privilege laws were put into place. Legislators passed these kind of laws to help stores apprehend and detain shoplifters. One, if they suspect somebody of shoplifting, they have to have some sort of cause, as they say, or reason. You can't just stop random people. But the law protects them from lawsuits should one of the people they detain leads to a false arrest. And the detainment can only be for a brief period of time, until the police get there. So a private security store can do that. Technically, generally as a person, you can't detain somebody. It would be considered another type of crime. But these merchant privilege laws allow private merchants to detain someone in a shoplifting situation. So what else we have? Credit card theft. It's another common theft. It's a felony level, like I explained. Let's say somebody pickpockets somebody, on the street. They got their wallet, and the wallet contains credit cards. That's a felony charge, even though the wallet itself is probably worth less than $1,000, and maybe it has no cash in it. But the fact that it has at least one credit card, if there's more than one, you might end up with more than one charge. Credit card theft not only involves the actual theft of the card, but actually the numbers as well. That's what's valuable, right? Credit card theft, very common. Auto theft, as I explained, is a type of felony or a grand larceny crime. It is one of the most reported major crimes. Both amateurs and professionals engage in auto theft. There are various reasons why both types of criminals engage in stealing vehicles. For amateurs, joyriding, it's usually teens. Short-term transportation, I took the vehicle to get from one place to another. Sometimes that's city to city, street to street, state to state. Long-term transportation, meaning they intend to keep it for their own personal use. So they usually, paint it or fix it up and change it up so it looks different, put it in a disguise. Parts, some take them to strip of the resources like batteries and tires, and then they end up putting them on their own car. Commission of another crime. It's a getaway vehicle. They use it to get away. The professional car thieves, they do it for the profit. They engage in car cloning. The basic gist is they steal a luxury car in one area, and then they obtain a VIN number off a similar vehicle from a car on a dealership lot, usually in another state or a completely other area, and they switch them out and they sell the stolen vehicle with the valid VIN number on it. They steal cars to be sold to chop shops for spare parts. The book actually lists the common cars that are stolen, which are not high-end vehicles, like the 1996 Honda Accord, 2014 Toyota Camry. The reason being is the parts on these vehicles can get a thief a lot of money, and the money amounts. So be careful if you own one of these vehicles. Your parts might be more worth than the car. If you did a Kelley Blue Book check on the value of one of these cars, you'd see that the parts are probably worth more. Bad checks, intentionally writing and cashing checks on a closed account or non-existent account or account that doesn't have any money in it is a crime. It's a type of theft. Receiving and fencing stolen property is another theft crime. The idea of charging people who knowingly possess stolen goods was to deter theft and to break up crime organizations, such as like pawnbrokers who would buy stolen goods. Nowadays, if they do, they have to turn it over. You know who has a lot of stolen goods for sale? Craigslist. If you go on Craigslist, there's a lot of items. You may not see them as stolen. What happens is somebody usually reports them stolen. Let's say it's a laptop. Look for big items like that, like laptops, and other sort of electronic goods. iPhones. Usually somebody reports it stolen, gives the information to the police, and the police patrol Craigslist. They do that here in Plattsburgh. The creativity of the police. They'll see who's selling it. They will reach out and say that they're interested. And when they go to make the swap, guess what? The police confirm. When they get the item, they confirm that it's the stolen item, and then they arrest the person. So receiving stolen property. One who knowingly possesses stolen property with intent to benefit himself or a person other than an owner, or to impede the recovery by the owner. So you need to receive or possess goods, and you have to know that the goods are stolen, and you have to intend to benefit yourself or impede the owner from recovering it. Now you might be saying, well, how do you know? Generally based on the circumstances that surround it, that would make a reasonable person understand that those goods are possibly stolen. Let's say, for instance, you're walking down the street and there's a van parked and someone slides open the door and you see like 10 big flat screen TVs and the person says, I'll sell you one for $20. Chances are pretty good the TVs are stolen. Why? Because the flat screen TVs are worth more than $20. It's really weird that somebody is selling 10 of them out the back of a van on the side of the street. So the circumstances is what triggers that. Burglary, another type of economic crime. Under the common law, burglary was defined as breaking and entering of a dwelling being a residential home, place where someone lives, at night with intent to commit a felony once inside. That could be like stealing, raping, killing, committing a felony inside, setting fire. This is more serious than larceny because it involves a home, which could be occupied at the time, and it threatens the safety of occupants. This definition has changed over time, and now it's defined by statute, not the common law. A statute is law created by a legislator, and it can vary from state to state. So burglary, breaking in New York State is breaking and entering with intent to commit a crime therein. It doesn't identify business or home. They decide what level of burglary to charge with, whether it's a home or a house. So you can break and enter into a business with you have to have the intent to commit a crime therein, i.e. steal stuff maybe, or commit a larceny, or beat somebody up. That's an assault. And the level is going to depend on whether you broke and entered a home or broke and entered some other structure. Breaking doesn't mean using physical force. You can walk into an open door. You can push open the door. You can open a window that's been deemed unlocked. But you have to enter. Some states say you have to remain, but entering and partially being in, completely in. What if you open the door and just reach in and grab the 2 iPhones that are sitting on the table right inside the door and leave? That would be a burglary in New York State. Burglary. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, more information on burglary here. Just some statistics on burglary that I think you should be aware of. Oh, one more point on burglary, the charge. Some states distinguish, like the common law said that it had to be a home at night, no more at it could happen in the daytime, it could happen in the nighttime, it's still going to be a burglary. Why is that? Why is the difference? Why would there be a difference for a night? It's more likely someone to be home at night. But generally, nowadays, burglary doesn't happen at night. They mostly happen during the day times. Why? Because people aren't home. People aren't there, they're working. According to the FBI's UCR, about 1.5 million burglaries occur each year, but the burglary rates have been declining in the past decade. Why? Because homes are more secure. There's alarms. And like I said, most occur during the daytime hours. Why? Because people aren't at home. The average loss is more than $2,300 on a burglary. So certainly a serious economic crime. And our last economic crime is arson. And arson under the common law was defined as malicious or intentional burning of a home of another. That's what it used to be. Now it's much more broader than that. If you burn anything that is not yours, it will be considered arson. It could be a home, it could be a shed, it could be a building, it could be a car, it could be your friend's book. It's not limited to structures either. The act, the crime, the criminal act is setting fire or burning real or personal property with the intent to damage it. 45,000 arsons are reported annually. So the question becomes, who commits arson? Well, some arsonists just have, emotional issues. They're emotionally disturbed, which cause them to act out. And their acting out is in the form of destruction. Some are motivated by anger. Look at the protests. The protests, they turn into what people call riots because there's a bunch of people involved, but they turn to burning down buildings and setting cars on fire. Anger. What about, I think they say in the book professionals, but they're, professionals who set fire to gain profit. Yes, in order to collect insurance proceeds, but I don't necessarily call them professionals. Amateurs can do that too. Where somebody, I had a case where somebody was building a home. It was starting to cost the person way too much more money than what it would be worth in the end and what the property was worth. So one night decided to burn it down to get insurance money. So while some do set fires professionally to do so, I think the more common route for arson is revenge and anger, or somebody who has an emotional antisocial behavior underlying issue. So those are our blue collar or street collar crime, economic crimes. The next set of crimes we're going to talk about are white collar crimes.